human being can be seen on the forearm with the timer, where the currency of the world was also the time. The wealthy people can perhaps live till the eternity, but the poor live on day-by-day basis. After waking up, Will finds out he only had about 24 hours time on his watch. He comes down to greet his mother, Rachel, who's doing her 50th birthday celebration. It does not last too long after they talk about their finances. Rachel reveals she had 3 days on her arm and reminds Will about the loan's payment. He assures his mother that he will find a way to pay. Rachel tells him that she will be away for work and accumulate money to pay some amount from loan. She asks Will to come at the bus station so that she won't run out of time. Right after she gives Will 30 minutes for him to buy nice lunch. They kiss and Will says goodbye to go to work. On his way, he meets a kid called Maya. She was asking for some money, so Will gives her 5 minutes and makes her smile. Will reaches his workplace and meets his friend Boral. Both works at a factory where they make storage devices for time. After the day is over, he gets paid after clocking out. He was being paid less money as usual, to which he is being told that the work quota has increased and he did not reach the threshold. Later on, Will goes to a local bar where some familiar men invite him to gamble with them, but he refuses to participate. He also takes 1 hour time from a man who owed him earlier and head towards his friend Boral. He finds him in an intoxicated state, where he reveals about a man who had been buying everyone free drinks all night. Will gets to know that this man had over a century. He goes to the man, whose name was Henry, and tells him that he was vulnerable to the thieves at the bar and he should leave. But Henry was not scared of anyone. A bunch of men show up at the bar, while everyone rushes out. Boral tells Will that these are called Minutemen, who usually rob people or do even worse. He suggests Will to go, but will decide to stay and watch. He tells him that he won't do anything stupid, so Boral leaves him. Forties, who was the leader of the Minutemen, tells Henry to give him his time. He was willing to fight for it. Henry was pretty nauseous and go into the restroom, while a Minuteman was on the watch. Immediately, Will knocks the door along with the watcher and rescue Henry from there. They both run away while being chased by Forties and his group. They somehow manage to climb over a gate and hide in an empty building. Minutemen were about to catch them, but soon after they give up the chase down. One of the men reveals to Forties that he knows Will. Henry and Will decide to sit and talk, where Henry reveals that he is nearly 105 years old. He explains how his mind was tired and he was actively looking ways to end it all. Will gets angry at him, since his mother and himself were working many jobs just to be able to see the next day. Henry ends up telling Will about the secrets of the cruel world they were in. Wealthy people increase the cost of living, hence the poor humans keep ending their lives, resulting in more time going to rich people. In reality, there was plenty of time for everyone. But, to be able to live forever, rich people were greedy and lustful for poor people's time. Henry ends up questioning, what would Will do with this much time? He answered that he would not waste it like Henry was. Henry thinks deeply about Will's words and they rest for the night. In the morning, Henry gives all of his time to Will, except 5 minutes. In a few minutes, Will wakes up and finds himself with a century worth of time. Will looks for Henry and finds him on top of a bridge. His final seconds were counting down. He smiles and falls of the bridge. Later on, he heads toward his friend's house and meets Boral's wife along with her newborn baby. He asks for Boral to come out, where he reveals to him about his time. Will tells him about the last night's incident, to which Boral asks him what he was planning on to do. Since Will now knows the reality, he will try to bring justice. Before leaving, Will hand Boral a decade worth of time. With this much time, Boral's head towards the bar nearby, while Will's mother had paid a loan and head towards home in a local bus, but she finds out that she does not have enough to pay for it since the prices went up. She requests to the driver along with the passengers, but everyone looks away from her. Being desperate, she begins to run towards the other bus station, where Will was waiting for her. He realizes this and they both can be seen running towards each other as the death comes closer for Rachel. They finally watch each other running. Both run as fast as they can, but Rachel ends up leaving this world before Will could reach her hand. Will was crying in agony knowing they were so close to living the dream life they always wanted. Next day, timekeepers, who are considered to a cop in this futuristic world, comes and picks up Henry's body from the river. Raymond, who was the senior timekeeper along with his junior called Jaeger, investigate on the scene. Before they were leaving, Raymond noticed a camera on the bridge. On the other hand, Will sits inside a cab with a positive face, ready to go through all the time zones in his way. On his trip to New Greenwich, they encounter many borders, where Will has to pay a fee to be able to enter each time zone. Will reaches last border, which costs him 1 year worth of time. Driver curiously asks Will for his intentions for the arrival in New Greenwich, and Will says that he want to make the people pay. This city was totally different from what he was used to in the past. Will exits the car and run pretty quickly as if he still had less time. As he looked into the watch, he finally acted if he was a normal human being. Meanwhile, a woman was watching Will, whose name was Sylvia. He enters the hotel and talks to the receptionist for a suite. Later, he wakes up in his luxurious room and looks at his time and feels relieved. Though he was on the more comfortable bed, her mother's death was still making him anxious. His experiences delicious food and drinks and pays the waitress about a week worth of time. She noticed something about Will and pointed out that he was acting a bit too fast. He replies saying he is not fast at everything. Will plans on doing a wardrobe change before entering the casino. Timekeepers also see Will in the surveillance footage. Yeager reports to Raymond about crossing the bridges earlier. While they were getting more information about Will, Raymond reveals he knew about Will's father. Later, Will walks to the casino and sits at the poker table. At the table, Will was being acquainted with a billionaire whose name was Philip. Will has won over 2 centuries worth of poker winnings. Philip increased the pot by 50 years. Despite the fact, Will calls with huge confidence, to which river turn out to be 6 of diamonds. His focus goes to the beautiful woman, whose name was Sylvia, sitting beside Philip. Philip shows his sleeve to be able to reveal about 10 centuries worth of time. He explains the difference between the rich and poor, telling this as the natural selection. He increased pot by 2 centuries. Will end up calling it, leaving him with just 30 seconds worth of time. As a result, Will wins 10 centuries. This makes billionaire Philip thrilled. Meanwhile, Will was looking at Sylvia, who comes out to be Philip's daughter. She invites Will to the party the next day. The very next day, Philip ends up buying an expensive car from his winnings to drive to Philip's mansion. Inside, he was met with Philip's wife, grandmother, and daughter Sylvia, who he met earlier. Will was roaming around, while Sylvia approaches him and they begin to talk. They begin to know more about each other and their conversation lead them to dance. Sylvia asks him if he came from ghetto, but Will does not admit it or deny her claims. She opens up to him about her life and explains how time was just useless. Meanwhile it was happening, her father and mother stare at both of them, which make them go outside to the beach. Sylvia and Will takes off their clothes and goes into the water. They are floating while the moonlight glowing on their arms, being few inches apart from each other. She tries to make some space, but the ocean waves make them even closer. Suddenly, the romantic moment was abrupted when someone calls Sylvia on the shore. Upon their return, Philip asks Will to join him on the poker table. But the timekeepers comes in without invitation and takes Will away from the spot while everyone watches. They take him into an office where Raymond introduces himself to Will. There he asks Will the reason to come and stay in New Greenwich from ghetto. He answers him saying Henry gave him all this time before he jumped into the river. Raymond did not believe this and takes away all his time, leaving him with just 2 hours. He asked Raymond to arrest all the rich people who are stealing from the poor. Seeing this, Raymond was stunned, as it reminded him of Will's father. Not wasting any time, Will attacks the timekeepers and holds Sylvia hostage. They enter through the kitchen and then drive off in Will's car. In the car chase, Raymond is able to hit them and made them lose balance. Will was an expert driver, so he shows his magic. After a while, they manage to lose the timekeepers and hides under a bridge. Will asks her for time, but she was not willing to do anything, he said. In the morning, while driving, their car run over traffic spikes. This makes them crash brutally off of the bridge. Forties along with his group comes to check on both of them while they were unconscious. He ended up taking away Sylvia's time, but since they heard sirens, he left her with 30 minutes before leaving in rush. Will gives her a few minutes while they go away to find more time. With 3 minutes left, he knocks on his friend's door, Boris. There Greta, Boris's wife, comes out and reveals that Boris is long dead. Since Will gave him 10 years worth of time, he drank himself to death. Sylvia was pretty stressed and has barely any time left. Will notices her earrings and go to a pawn shop to sell them. There they get a 2 days worth of time. Later they walk through the city while talking about Sylvia's family business. Will deliberately ask how much was their worth, but Sylvia suggests too much that no point knowing it. He ends up calling Philip and asks for 1,000 years worth of time and give it to Ghetto City in exchange for his daughter. Raymond was giving him warning so that he does not end up like his father. Will suggests his father died during a fight, but Raymond reveals it was far more dangerous than this. At night, Sylvia was given Will's mother's clothes. Later he explains to her about her late mother. He also tells her how his father was a gambler, but unlike him he didn't gamble on poker. His father won a lot, but him giving away his winnings was the reason he was shot dead. Sylvia and Will were both the same age, so their bonding was growing good. It is morning time. He observes if Sylvia's father was going to keep his promise. They do not see any time transfers, which disappoints her a lot. Even though there was no money, Will was willing to let Sylvia go. He takes her to a phone booth and tells her to use it to call her father. In turn, she gives him a kiss. She calls Philip and scolds him for not sending a dime. As she was talking, Raymond arrived there and pointed a gun at Will. Sylvia sees this and ends up shooting Raymond in a rush. Will points a gun at him, but he does not take any time from Raymond, instead gives him a bit more. Both drive off using a Raymond's car. Both of them were parked on the roadside, where Sylvia asks Will for their plan. Sitting in a cop car, they misuse it and stops a car, in which they find the same man from the pawn shop. They take away the car in a minute. Later on, they were sitting inside the car and watching their own news. Will was still convincing her to go back to her father, but Sylvia refuses and does not want to live the same boring life again. Sylvia and Will later kiss and have a romantic moment. Inside the office, Will was explaining his partners that he did not pay the ransom money asked by Will. Raymond's arrived before Philip could explain himself. He suggests that her daughter did not want to be rescued. Philip says sorry to him and suggests that she has Stockholm Syndrome. He even bribed him with tons of money, but Raymond is not interested and leaves. Very next day, Will was teaching Sylvia on how to shoot a gun. They talk about his plan to spread time to people and help them, to which Sylvia agreed, and she was willing to help him too. Later in a local bank, a big truck suddenly crashes through the glass. Both of them pulls off a heist, stealing lots of time storage devices. They also encourage other to take everything they could as well. Later, Will gives time to Greta, Maya, and the charity time distributor. On the other hand, Forties was taking away lives. He was also interested in 10 years reward on both Will and Sylvia. Philip was also watching the news about her daughter stealing from his own shops and banks. At night, Raymond and his men were all around the motel, in which they both were staying in. They suddenly hear the noise and figure it out and ends up jumping off the window. Raymond was chasing them along with his gun. They jump on the roof and hears a shout out. In a moment, they see a bus, where they bribe the driver and end up losing Raymond. Meanwhile, Forties was searching for Will and Sylvia. He asked a group of people and even take one of Guy's life in the process. Seeing this, a man take a step forward, but he wanted a share cut from the profit. At a motel, both talk about the next steps and challenges they will face and accepts their fate even if they end up dead. Immediately, the door was burst open by Forties and his men. He was feeling very generous, so Forties gives him a chance to play a game for his life. He rolls up his sleeve to play the game of strong arm, and they start to play. Will was struggling up until his final seconds arrive. Suddenly he turns around while Forties was losing focus. While Forties' fear grows, Will takes a gun out of his ankle and shoots all of his men, where Forties' time ends too. Sylvia and Will were standing on the rooftop, seeing the tax prices rising rapidly. Will was feeling hopeless, telling the rich won't change and keep stealing poor people's time. He thinks a million years would probably make a real difference, to which Sylvia suggests that she have a plan. Very next day, Philip goes into the building along with tons of bodyguards. His daughter catches their attention while calling for her father. Will was standing among the guards and ends up putting gun directly at Philip's head. They command all the guards to put all the weapons down and takes Philip hostage. He was taken to his office, where there was a device with millions of years. Philip explains to them that society will fail if the time goes into wrong hands. When he says that for someone to be able to reach immortal, many must be sacrificed. Hearing his words, Will could not control himself and ends up pulling a gun on him. He tells him immortality isn't worth it, even if one person has to sacrifice the life. Both of them leave right after. On the other hand, cops' vehicles are blocking the main door and timekeepers shoot at Will and Sylvia as they bash throughout one of the office in the middle unharmed. Raymond, however, does not give up the chase. Soon they arrives at Ghetto, and as they almost reach safely, Raymond interrupt and crash into them. Will gives the device to Maya to give away all of it to people. Raymond pulls a gun on them, but because of the crowd they end up escaping from his sight. Raymond hijack one of the cars and their chase goes on. They end up meeting where Raymond had a gun pointed at Will, and he admits how the gap between rich and poor had to be maintained, and he was also from Ghetto. His eyes were open to the hard truth, but as they talk, he looks at his time and dies on the spot. Both Will and Sylvia try to recover their time and run towards Raymond's car, since it had some spare time. Will reaches there first and replenish himself. Both run towards each other, just like he ran to his mother, but unlike last time, he reaches Sylvia and saves her life. Next day, we can see all the Ghetto citizens are crossing the borders. All the systems start to collapse, and we see Sylvie and Will getting ready to rob a massive time bank.